Well, if you enjoyed last week's podcast after the Leon win, this one might be a little bit different. Daisy is on holiday. She's on the beach somewhere sunny, as a lot of this Arsenal squad have appeared to be perhaps mentally in the last couple of weeks, picturing themselves over in Lisbon. We've booked all of our flights and accommodation. We're going to be in there, the whole Gooner team out there for the Champions League final. But as Arsenal have found out, there's still a bit of football to be played in the meantime. Firstly, I'm not just joined by Isobel Gilligan. I'm joined by Football Writers Association Student Football Writer of the Year nominee, Isobel Gilligan. Izzy, congratulations. A piece for the Gooner as well, which I think we're all extra proud of.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, no, it was really exciting to find out that I made it on the short list of three. Thanks to Freddie for telling me, encouraging me to apply, and that article which I love writing, which was for the first ever print edition of the Guna about Amanda Idderstett. And so yeah, hopefully lots of Arsenal women's fans have read it, and it's a topic that's I guess it's a bit topical, and women's health, something I like writing about. So I'm yeah really pleased to be on that list.
Yeah, I encouraged you and another friend to apply. You both made the long list and I didn't. So no more Mr. Nice Guy when it comes around to the 2025 awards. There you go. But we've got two games to get stuck into. If there's ever two games you can probably group together in your analysis, you wouldn't group together Leon and Aston Villa. You would group together Aston Villa and Brighton. The trend has continued. For me, the worrying thing is Villa you can write off, can't you, as an anomaly before the Brighton game happens. But now one game has made six changes, and then the other game you've gone six changes to go back to your first choice side. I almost see it as there's almost an A and B team at the moment. Renee Slagers does know her best team. I think it's safe to say she's got a sort of first 11, maybe with one midfielder, one winger, different, really the only variables. But both of those sides showing the same mistakes, the same flaws, and ultimately the same results is the worrying thing. The sheer number of players used. And if it was the Villa side that played again against Brighton, which was never going to happen, and then that result happens again, then it probably adds strength to this A team, if you like, in inverted commas. But you've brought the big guns back in, and again the same mistakes are being made. It's these problems are throughout the squad at the moment. What do you put these two games down to overall?
I, I mean, as you said, the first one was a bit of an anomaly, maybe a bit of a hangover from the success in Lyon, and then just kind of haven't been able to get back focused and ready to play in the league, and it was very disappointing. Um, I saw the second, I turned on for the second half of that game because I was at the gym for the first half, and I saw the score as I came out and thought, oh my God, behind at the break is the message they always put out at half time, and then I watched the rest and I just couldn't really quite believe what I was seeing. And then I think, there was a lot of discussion about it on social media, and a lot of the players apologising as they do. And then it felt like, oh, okay, we're going to go into Brighton. Everyone hopefully would have learned from the mistakes. All the starting lineup, as you said, looks a little bit more like kind of the first choice team. Hopefully they can correct the mistakes made before, learn from it, and go in and play. And it was again just a bit of a disaster. And we've got to give credit to the Brighton and the Villa sides that had these big victories because they both did so well. But the Arsenal teams were weak. They, defensively, it was just like they were broken down so easily. Couldn't really keep hold of the ball in the middle. It just seemed to just keep going wrong. And it felt yesterday that Brighton, every time they got through our back line, it was just going to be another goal. And I wasn't surprised that it ended up that they scored four because that's just how bad we were.
Yeah, it certainly speaks to the competitiveness of the WSL, but Arsenal have scored 9 goals in 2 games against Brighton this season in the league and the cup. I've covered Arsenal at Brighton before when Jodie Taylor and Katrina Kuhl were the wingers, with Stina Blackstenius up front and about two first team players on the bench at Arsenal won 3-0 that night during sort of the ACL season. These results shouldn't be happening, essentially. And I think how I'd probably like to look at it is, this happens in football. Teams will have a big game. We're seeing it a lot this stage of the season as well. I think, people have talked a lot about the men's side as well. There are teams in men's and women's football a lot at the moment who are taking their foot off the gas for these Premier League games, WSL games, domestic games, however you want to look at it, because of the allure of being where they are in Europe, but also having nothing to play for left in the WSL. City drawing with United on Sunday meant that Arsenal secured European football. Now, I know finishing second against third is still a motivation. However, getting European football secured is even bigger. So to do that, they could have done that against Villa as well. And now they have done it without kicking a ball in what happened in the Manchester derby, but still finishing second down to the final day is frustrating. But in future seasons, let's just say if Arsenal were in the FA Cup final next weekend, if they were still in the title race after landing from Lyon, if they were still in with a chance, as they were mathematically, as unlikely as it was, this can't happen in future seasons. You can't come in off of one big win and impressive and as brilliant as Lyon was, and these two games shouldn't take away from Lyon at all. But this strikes me as a bit of naivety from the squad and from a young manager in Rene Slagers as well in struggling to manage coming off the back of this game, going into two more games that don't mean as much, but also where there is still football to be played and second place to fight for.
Yeah, I agree. I think that Rene always says that they have their eye on the game that's being played that day or that week or whatever it is, whatever's next for them. But it almost feels like they've got either an eye on the Champions League final or they're still focusing on what happened in Lyon and they just haven't really kind of moved on and focused. And I don't know whether they thought, Aston Villa have had a really poor season, we're going to be fine. And that was quite clear with the lineup that Renee Sager started for that game, because I think she just thought, this is a good opportunity for some squad rotation. But it was quite clear quite quickly that that wasn't the right decision to make before that game. And Villa came out like firing out the blocks. And it was the same with Brighton, but it was disappointing to see, with a stronger lineup starting for that game that they couldn't manage to sort of see it through. I think, we've seen teams like Chelsea have these kind of hangovers from big games or from having so many fixtures, but they seem to always be able to find a way to get back into the game or to keep it a draw or to sort of win by one goal at the end. Whereas it feels like Arsenal just kind of let go in these two matches. And once they were sort of 2-1 down, there was no hope of coming back. And it just didn't feel like, not that the players weren't putting in effort, because there was a lot of players, they all looked very emotional at the end and quite kind of angry and disappointed in themselves. But I just I just don't know what's gone wrong. But I think it must be a combination of just whatever's going on at the training ground. But it's just, yeah, it just seems to be a bit of a rubbish end to kind of a season that's not been that impressive domestically at all, really. I mean, second and third is still great in the table, but no domestic trophies and having some quite strange losses throughout the season. This is just another couple of examples of that.
Yeah, I think it's just clear that, in the future, when Rene Slagers talks about we want to be active in all four competitions, this has been proof that of how hard it is to do, how hard it is to do to win in the Champions League, win again in the WSL, get to domestic cup finals. But Arsenal have to prove that they're going to be able to do it. They've had these cup knockouts this season that were to take away those chances of silverware. They are massive underdogs against Barcelona. Of course, they are. They can win the Champions League. But in future seasons, you can't allow games like this to come in and derail you a bit. And I think probably Arsenal are lucky that they won't. They can still finish second. They only need a point, I think it is, to finish second against Manchester United on the final day. If Arsenal beat Barcelona, these games will just be laughed about for years from everyone and go, can you believe this happened? And there's quite a few games in the past that are like that. But I still think there are learning points from these games, and I think that's the interesting debate: is how much do we read into these games ahead of Barcelona, ahead of Manchester United? As a Man United fan pointed out on Twitter to me yesterday, still got fate to face them before Barcelona, even if one game is more than the other. But what we've probably learned now after the two games that we can't just write them off as an anomaly. We've sort of agreed on that. So what is the concern now, and what do you need to see against United apart from just a back to normal, if you like? What is the concern? What do you need to see on Saturday to give you a little bit more comfort going into Barcelona?
I think we honestly, it would be great to get a win. If we got a win on Saturday, I think the confidence would be so much higher going to Barcelona. If we lose at home on Saturday, I think it'll really kind of derail a lot of the fans. Everyone will lose a bit of faith. So that's, first and foremost. I think it just didn't really look like that the team flowed well as a unit on the in the last two games. We couldn't seem to play out from the back. It wasn't kind of flowing well, couldn't keep hold of the ball in the midfield. A couple of players had good link ups and sort of little partnerships all around the pitch, but it just didn't work as a whole. And I wonder whether that's something we'd like to see against United, sort of a bit more of the free flowing football, keeping the possession as Arsenal like to do. And against Man United, that would be really positive if we can hold on to the ball and hopefully score the goals. Then we should be able to beat them. But it's just we've already drawn to them once this season. It would be great to get the win over them. Obviously, as you said, you really need a point to secure second place, but I don't think that's really the important thing here. We've got the European football. I think it's about having building that confidence going into the Champions League final a couple of weeks after that. I think the defence were particularly poor in the last two games, and I know that's probably an obvious thing to say because of we've conceded 4 and 5 goals, so that obviously means the defence weren't great. It does have to go through a lot of players on the pitch, but I just think it just looked like defence was sometimes a bit asleep. They would have to chase these balls, have to be in these 50-50 foot races, and that's not where you want to be. You want to be defensively solid, as we were in that Lyon game when Lyon started sort of sending waves of attack. It felt like everything was dealt with, and to have a kind of really solid defensive back line that teams like United, who've been very good in attacking this season, are going to be fearful of. And coming into this, they won't be because they will have seen how to exploit the weaknesses from those last two matches. So they've got a bit of an advantage probably in that perspective.
The reports coming out of the French media today that Lyon manager Joe Montemuro is going to be leaving at the end of the season to take the Australia job, the Matilda's job. I wonder if there's a couple of people at Lyon who've gone, fair enough. That Arsenal were really good, weren't they, on Sunday? And then I've watched Arsenal's next couple of games and gone, why on earth did you change that front three, the pace, the direct front three, and disrupted that and made those changes to the side? Look at what we could have done against it when Aston Villa and Brighton have done it. I think it again shows how much Montemurro got his tactics wrong because, as we've spoken about so many times, Arsenal can change things with their defence, but there are profiles in this squad that need to be improved upon in the transfer window. We know these weaknesses. Some of them can be addressed tactically and formation-wise. Some of them have to only be changed in terms of getting in new personnel and making a few changes in the summer, which is, I think, even if Arsenal win the Champions League and finish second, I think we still know how big a transfer window this is going to be, as we spoke about before. And unfortunately, I think a lot of the time going into these big games, going into these finals, you need players to know their spots are up for grabs. You need players coming off the bench and those sort of squad players to think they're in with a chance of making enough of an impact in these games. You want everyone to be fighting tooth and nail to when it comes to Lisbon on the 24th or 25th, I think it is, to say, I want to be in that starting lineup. Here's why I deserve to be. And like I said earlier, Renee Slagers knows her best team. Arsenal players probably know Renee Slagers knows her best team. They probably know who's in with a chance. If you're Chloe Kelly and Beth Mead, Caitlin Ford, I think there was an element in probably Ford's performance in thinking, actually, we've seen how well she's fought this season. There is some competition for the wingers, a tiny bit in midfield, although I think that's down to more selection in terms of what's going to work against Barcelona. But I just don't think there is that motivation. I'm not saying the players just walked out and don't care because they're playing against Barcelona, but sometimes it'd be nice to have that added pressure and jeopardy of these spots being up for grabs. But I think Arsenal know their best team, and there aren't going to be many surprises, unless another game like this happens against United. I just don't think they've got that element of motivation in that regard to play their way into the team for the final.
Yeah, for sure. I think having a competitive squad with one or two people in each position, it automatically drives forward the motivation and the kind of determination and probably the intensity, and that therefore translates to a better game on the pitch. And whether that's having academy players kind of training more frequently and pushing these people in training. Obviously, maybe they're not going to start on the weekends, but just having that competitive nature in training, or just, something to fight for. I do feel, especially towards the end of the season, it just, as you said, it feels like people are getting a bit comfortable and they know, okay, I'm definitely starting. I'm in the starting lineup week in, week out, so obviously I'll be in this game, and it just feels a bit like, a bit stale. I don't know. There's players on the bench who could, come on when there's a bit of squad rotation, but they're not. You can't compare the skills between, a couple of players, so they know that they're not going to be starting, so they almost maybe don't keep fighting for that position. And I think that that's what's quite difficult. And as you said, I think the summer will be really exciting. It's Renee Sega's first full transfer window. I hope that she's started eyeing up some players and she knows what kind of move she wants to make. And I think it will be really interesting to see whether she does want to add in kind of a second or sort of reserve and or third person for each spot. And that would be something really cool to see next season, I think.
Yeah, I think we've spoken about it so many times in that, Rene can be forgiven maybe for not rotating as much this season, but I think her squad management, her player management is going to be a real challenge, a real test of her next season in terms of how she rotates. But, I think at this stage of the season as well, almost you shouldn't be learning more about players. You shouldn't be finding out your best squad. I think that is a good thing, probably that she knows what the best lineup is, but also we've known the good and bad of this lineup at the same time. And now it's almost such a long time between the semi-final and Barca. I said to you the other week that the quarters and the semis for the men's Champions League, it felt like such a quick turnaround. It was like you're very much in Champions League mode. You play one or two league games in the meantime, then you're straight back into it. This feels like a really long time. You have to then wait those 2 weeks at the end of the season as well. I think Renee Slagers will probably be really looking forward to that in terms of not having these games, not having this competitive pressure. And actually, then we talk about players wanting to play their way into the team, having that motivation to go out on the training ground and really work on stuff before Barcelona, who we know are very different to Brighton or Lyon. So how Arsenal build up to the final, I think, is going to be really interesting as well. Um, there is a common denominator in terms of the two games. It is the defensive mistakes. Also with Manu Zinsberger in goal, we've got to talk about her. Left visibly emotional after the game yesterday. I've been going through Susie's pictures. She was in tears after full time. And it's been a really tough couple of games for her. Brighton scored some really good goals yesterday. But I think over the two games, we've seen that there is an issue here. She's not got the confidence she's had before. She's not Daphne van Domselaar. And ultimately, Daphne van Domselaar playing through the pain, being, not rushed back from injury, but being risked against Lyon, not being able to take goal kicks by the end. So you've almost got a Daphne van Domselaar and half an ankle being preferred to Manu Zinsberg, who was fully fit. I think that just says it all about Arsenal's goalkeeping situation. I don't think you have to be brutally rude about Manu Zinsberger. I think Arsenal know what this situation is now, and Manu Zinsberger, albeit a lot of yesterday wasn't her fault, I think her being in tears after these two games, unfortunately, speaks to what has happened in terms of the goalkeeping situation.
Yeah, and I think so. And as you said, we don't have to attack her personally. She's been great over the past seasons. She has been Arsenal's number one for a couple of years, and she's had some incredible moments. So these kind of performances, they don't take that away from her, that she has been good in the past. I think it's just recently she hasn't looked confident, and that's because she's not played enough minutes this season, and she's just kind of lost that kind of consistency, and I think it started to show at the end of last season a little bit as well. People were being quite critical of her performances then, and this has been even worse. As you said, those first two goals Brighton scored, no one's saving those. The commentators said it, the pundits said it, we all thought it. They were amazing strikes. But I think if you look at Brighton, Sophie Baggerly, who played for them and had an unreal performance, she's their second choice goalkeeper, and she got called in at the end of the warm up to play in that match. And that's quite a high stakes game for them against a supposedly better opposition. and she was phenomenal. And then, Manu's coming in and she knows she's going to be playing and she's Arsenal's second choice goalkeeper and she's unable to stop or be confident or kind of make those blocks or come out of her goal and still beat the ball back there. I just think that's quite telling that Brighton's second goalkeeper, looks a lot more confident and ready to go than Arsenal's second goalkeeper, who could be called upon in a Champions League final. And I think it's something that needs addressing over the summer. But I was very sad to see her looking upset yesterday because it's not always the goalie's fault if the game loses. And I remember playing sports at school and everyone said goalie guilt, and it is a real thing. But yeah, I think something that the club need to look at for sure.
Yeah, we won't mention one of those videos of you in goal you showed me a few weeks ago. That was, I think, yeah. Well, I mean, and me also. If I have to go in at five-a-side, you might as well have a shadow in goal. It's not good viewing. But I think you make the right point. Bagley at the game of her life. She's not played since January. Manu's played a Champions League quarter-final, a semi-final, and then these two WSL games. And just the Arsenal defence. The start Arsenal made was unbelievably shaky, and I think a lot of that did stem from her trying to play out from the back, and she's been Arsenal's better goalie playing out from the back a lot. Daphne, I was sort of not sure about some of her kicking earlier this season. Sabrina D'Angelo was often preferred to Manu when Arsenal wanted to go long and go a bit more direct, and that spoke to actually in the games where Arsenal wanted to play short. That's when Manu would come in, but that sort of just went out of the window yesterday. And yeah, whether Daphne plays against Manchester United, I'll have to keep a close eye on. I think that's a really interesting call. But almost the fact that Arsenal are sacrificing her, if you like, and just wrapping her in cotton wool again just shows how big the gap probably is now between first and second choice goalie and how well Daphne has done this season. And yeah, it's been disappointing for Manu. Again, these weaknesses on the transitions, as you say, a couple of really good goals. I spoke to Renee in the build up to this game about how important Arsenal's pressing is against Brighton. Brighton love to play out from the back. In the end, it was the other way round. Brighton pressed really well against Arsenal, and some fantastic finishes. I mean, Kirby's absolutely top drawer. Cankovic, I actually got quite excited for, quite guiltily. I was covering this from home and I was like, "Ooh, I quite enjoyed the goal," and then went back to my sort of Arsenal persuasions. But sometimes you have to sort of sit and admire it. I love those volleys, and I know there was someone blocking Manu, but when the balls hit that hard, I almost don't care as much about these players blocking the goalkeeper because I just think a lot of the time they're not going to save it anyway, and that decision probably wouldn't have made a massive difference. So Brighton, I think we've got to give credit to them because before the game, Dario Vidosic goes, "Oh, I didn't know these players were announcing they were leaving today," and I'm thinking, "Oh, tension in the Brighton camp, an unhappy camp perhaps." And every time Arsenal play a team that I sense have off-field issues, not saying I know anything about Brighton here, and I think it was quite a small problem. They never seem to take advantage of it. You go to Real Madrid and you go, "Oh, I don't think this club are behind their women's team." Chelsea had the issues with when Emma Hayes made those comments, and Jess Carter, I think, had words with her last season, and people going, "Oh, this Chelsea camp are not happy with each other," and then Chelsea beat Arsenal 3-1 at the Bridge. Arsenal never seem to take advantage of this, as a side note. But I think you've got to give credit to Brighton, haven't you? They've had a good season, and again, talking about how competitive the WSL is, and Arsenal, when they're down at the moment. We know how good they are at scoring goals in quick succession, but when they're conceding them in quick succession as well, I think it's the sign of a side that maybe either have so much confidence or can really lack it, and heads can go down.
Yeah, I think that was the case. I think people just didn't look confident on Saturday, especially after conceding a reasonably early goal. It looked like it was downhill from there, and it didn't feel like the players were rushing to get back. Apart from in the last 7 minutes of stoppage time, when all the players, Mariona scored a goal, and they're all running around to try. At that point, that's a little bit too late for the major urgency to kick in, and that it almost looked like the players were sort of sometimes cross with each other. There was a bit of anger play. I don't know if they were just sort of on field taking it out on the situation, but it just didn't look like they were going to win that game from almost from the start. It was a really bad start for them, and I think that was the story for the rest of the games. It just sort of ended up being Arsenal just crossing the ball over the Brighton box, and nothing was going in. Bagley was claiming a lot of balls, and the Brighton defense were very solid, and it just. Yeah, it was a tricky watch that one. I quite liked Jenna Niswonger coming on though. I thought she looked good. And I think like quite a interesting decision from Renee to play her in that sort of game when she hasn't really had that many minutes this season. But I think she looked pretty solid. She put in a couple of good crosses, so I thought that was something promising that came from it.
Yeah, still baffled. Katie Reed played right back against Villa, and Nisonga was sat at home, to be honest.
Mm.
And I think that, yeah, that was a better decision. And rattled the crossbar at the end as well, which was
Yeah.
would have been another goal, another brilliant goal in a game of so many. Yeah, good to see her come on. But as you say, too many crosses. Bagley was just eating so many up. I said it in that Real Madrid second leg where when Kelly was putting all those crosses in, and I said to you at halftime, well, Arsenal aren't used to this. They're not a crossing team, and I know they had some joy in that, but it just became too predictable. Brighton crowded the penalty area. They're a well organised back five, and Arsenal just didn't seem to get any joy playing through central areas. They were forced wide. They were forced to crossing, and I just don't think you should get me started on the Blackstenius up front, Russo in the 10, because I thought Alessia Russo was Arsenal's best player in the first half, and then she spends the second half. I cannot name a single game where she's been effective in the number 10 role, and she's the joint top scorer in the WSL. I can't get my head around it, and I know that wasn't Arsenal's biggest issue, but when the game state turns to Blackstenius and Russo in the 10. I just don't think it's worked for Arsenal this season. And as I say, if you're going to do Blackstenius in the 10, I'd rather have Mornham or Blackstenius up front. Sorry, I'd rather have Mariana or Mornham in the 10. But the reason that won't happen is because Arsenal won't take Alessia Russo off because she's their best striker. So it's just you're going around in circles. And yeah, that seemed to just play out again yesterday.
Yeah, for sure. It's not something that we like to see when that comes on. We've said it time and time again, and it hasn't really ever had success. So it was a shame that that happened. But Russo did have a good attempt at the end with a very good save from Bagley once again. But yeah, it was a bit of a disaster, and I hope it's a lot more positive on Saturday.
So where do Arsenal go from here? As you said, it's not the toughest task in terms of just needing the 1 point rather than three against Manchester United. European football already secured. A big difference, though, in the favourability of Champions League qualifiers, not having to do that round one mini tournament if you do finish second. And I think that should be a massive motivation, for Arsenal, to be honest. And I don't think they'll need one. Final game of the season, over 40,000 at the Emirates, big occasion. I mean, this is the game to bounce back. I think if you lose again going into Barcelona, I don't want to think about that possibility really. But Arsenal, you've got to look on the bright side and think how good Arsenal were, especially against Manchester United at the Emirates last season when it was sold out. As you say, drew there this season, very very much early doors under Rene Slagers. But United have had a really good campaign, secured European football as well. As we say, in with the chance of second, and the best defensive side in the league. Fallon Tullis-Joyce has been absolutely superb in goal. Talking of goalies replacing goalies, with Mary Earps going, United are going to pose a lot of threat. Their two Manchester derbies in particular have been really good fun. And this is quite different to the United side that Arsenal turned over quite easily last season.
Yeah, for sure. I've really enjoyed watching them this season as a neutral. A lot of their games have been really, really good, especially as you said, the Manchester derbies. They've really taken it to City, and I think in a season going into the season, people would have said City was were the favourites, but actually United have been. Maybe they haven't really got their flowers enough in those kind of situations because they have been excellent, and they've got so many threats all over the pitch, and they're a very young team, and I'm hoping that they'll Arsenal will be able to work them out and be able to beat them and overcome them and gain that confidence back because it's so important. We know the Emirates has been a bit of a fortress this season, barring that Lyon game and a couple of others, but it's been mainly a big home of success for the team. And I think with 40,000 tickets already sold, I'm sure it'll be 50,000, hopefully a bit more. It might be sold out, but that'll make a real difference. lunchtime kickoff in the sun. Hopefully, it'll be amazing atmosphere. So I think all of those things will help build Arsenal up, and they'll hopefully give them a bit more confidence going onto the pitch. We've got to watch out for some of United's players. I think Melvin Mallard's been great. She's got these kind of very threatening runs forward. I think that could be a problem for Arsenal. Celine Bizet, Grace Clinton, they've got threats all over the pitch, but so have Arsenal. And I think that they need to gain their confidence back. Remember, they're Champions League finalists. They've had some really great successes this season. They've scored so many goals, and make this one of those occasions where they come out all guns blazing and manage to get the win.
Yeah, and it's almost like a send-off game as well. Like, when before major tournaments teams play and then they get like waved off by the crowd and it's like good luck in your far off country where you're going to go and compete for silverware. And it's almost a bit like that. I know there's a lot more riding on it than that, but like for those fans who won't be in Lisbon, it's like it's your last chance to cheer Arsenal off. And we're having our end of season drinks afterwards. All are invited in the Tolly. And it's like I was saying to a friend earlier, I'm not postponing the end of season drinks until after Lisbon. This still is the end of the season, and then the Barcelona game is just floating about. In a couple of more weeks, this is for all of those home fans. It's the chance to go out in a blaze of glory. And Arsenal have got a record of scoring multiple goals at home, and they're going to need that. The way they're conceding. If there's one sort of thing you want to see in particular against Manchester United, is it defensive improvements on top of anything else?
Yeah, I think definitely. And I think that is really needed against this Manchester United side because they are very, very strong. And I think we'll need to be able to deal with everything at the back and just make it look confident and together because it hasn't. These teams, Brighton and Villa, have just managed to slip through with ball over the top and a bit of pace, and they've just they've been able to really take advantage and exploit the Arsenal defenders. And we've got some world-class defenders in that back line. We've got sort of like three international captains or something. Like they're all incredibly experienced and incredibly good players, and they've had some great performances this season. The last couple of games have gone seriously wrong, but I think it'll just be looking to look confident, look unified, and not let United kind of run through and slip those balls in because it's not that one. If they start conceding, I think with the kind of way the confidence has been, the performances have been, I don't know if they'll be able to come back from that. But I also think just as important is the front line, and I think if we score early and get those kind of, when we've played at the Emirates this season and it's just looked so convincing. The wins have looked so convincing and so great. Goals in quick succession, kind of just the way the football's flowed. I think that if we put a performance like that in, which we know we can because it's happened so many times this season, then United won't be able to stop Arsenal. I'd love to see, Russo score a couple. She's still on for the Golden Boot in WSL, I think, if she scores a couple on Saturday. Beth Mead still needs to register her 50th assist. I think that's a historical stat as well. So I think it'll be a day for hopefully lots of goals for Arsenal. But yeah, there needs to be improvements all over the pitch and as a whole team as well.
Yeah, Russo in the Golden Boot race, level with Shaw, and Manchester City play Crystal Palace. So we'll keep an eye on that. I know Alessia Russo's not one for personal milestones really, and Khadija Shaw may well enjoy herself against Palace on the final day as well. But yeah, it's United need to come there and win, and I think that's going to make it quite a fun game. There's an element of the Manchester derby where they could put their really impressive defence to good use, especially when they went down to 10 players as well. But as you say, they do have this attacking prowess. I'd expect Chloe Kelly to come in. I just think I really think Ford has done well, and if I had to pick the final team now, I'd go Ford and Kelly. I think maybe Ford and Mead are almost too similar, whereas Kelly just has the X factor. So I would almost always try and go now if they're all fit, one of Ford and Mead, and then Kelly on the other side. And I thought Ford and probably Mariona are Arsenal's best players against Brighton. As you say, the Russo thing, the fact she scored against them in the reverse fixture, that sort of hung over her. I think before then, the fact that she'd made this big move, that she'd been so good for Arsenal, but she'd not scored against United since the move. Now she has. She sort of got that off of her back. So yeah, it's the game of the game of the end of the season. That's the best game of the final game week with everything else tied up and done. And we'll be there, the whole Gooner team there at the Emirates. 12:30 kickoff. It's the only time I won't moan about an early kickoff because it means more time in the pub afterwards. And yeah, looking forward to it. Last one at the Emirates this season before a game that we sort of had on our calendars with an asterisk next to it, but now is actually happening, the Champions League final. I mean, we can't be too gloomy, is he, after these last two games, that we've got a Champions League final to look forward to.
I think so, and I think if we need a reminder of how exciting it is, we just go back and listen to last week's episode because we were all so kind of emotional and excited about it, and still are. But I think it's easy to kind of get let that be clouded a bit when there's a couple of negative results, but it is still incredible. And I mean, I'm so excited to go to Lisbon. I haven't been there for years and years. Not that I don't really remember doing anything interesting in the city, and to go to a football match abroad, it's always an incredible day out. And the fact that it's our own team in the final is yeah, just cherry on top. So I'm really looking forward to it. I'm also really excited for Saturday because yeah, last game at the Emirates of the season, my first season working in press box and stuff. So yeah, I'm really excited to wrap that up and hopefully have a good day and hopefully see an Arsenal win.
Yeah, gonna be a good day out, hopefully. Yeah, I have already listened back to last week's podcast that I just couldn't not, and I think I watched back my reaction video of Susie. Still watching that Mariana goal on loop as well. So yeah, plenty to look forward to. Arsenal against Manchester United, 12:30 kickoff. We'll have all of our usual coverage on the Gooner Fan Team website and across social media as well. And as you say, we'll be at the Champions League final. UEFA pending. It's not been routine. We are trying to get in, otherwise we'll all be there in the stands anyway. But yeah, we'll let you know about that. And Izzy, see you Saturday, bright and early.
Yeah, looking forward to it. See you then. Cheers.